I love Fire Emblem. I've honestly fallen for the series and everything it has to offer. I can't say anything along the lines of I've played the series for decades on original hardware and have timeless stories to tell of days old. However, everybody has a story nonetheless, and I can say for a fact that mine is a story that I find is a bit unconventional, to say the least. So the question remains, what is my story? How did I find the series? And how did it lead me to where I am today? For the 30th anniversary of the series, I think it's the perfect time to answer those questions. Hi, I'm Valentia. Sit back, grab an elixir, and relax. Let me tell you a story. So right off the bat, you're probably starting to make some guesses. What Fire Emblem game was I first introduced to? Which title did I first pick up? When did I start playing? Well, my answer is a bit unconventional. However, to answer the questions, I have to go back some years. I can't say entirely what year with certainty, but I'd imagine it was most likely around 2012 to 2013. And with that bit of information, it seems all but obvious what title I started out with. But even then, you're still wrong. At least, not entirely. See, the first Fire Emblem title I technically played was Awakening. The demo version. Yeah, for someone who would have been 11 at the time, I would have only had my DS and 3DS for a few years at that point. I say that because my parents never wanted to expose me to everything the modern day had to offer for a long time. For example, when I was 9, all I was really exposed to in terms of popular culture was stuff from decades prior. I was raised on old school rock, especially the band Kiss. However, it was a matter of time before they finally started to introduce my brother and I to our own source of video games at home. It started with the DS and the Wii, eventually me getting my own 3DS because I had seen news on it and I demanded for one eventually. Needless to say, I got it, but I didn't have much to utilize with it. I remember that I initially started with Mario Kart 7 and New Super Mario Bros. 2. Along with that, I didn't really have the best access to internet. For a while, we had to leech off some unknown source of public Wi-Fi that sufficed in what it had to do, albeit slow. Eventually, we did get our own internet, but even then, they never wanted us to keep it on often because of how terrible of a service we were able to get. And so I had to find my own gaming experiences, all within the boundaries I had set, which is what led to my constant usage of game demos from the eShop and WeShop channel. It was one of those browsing sessions that I found it. The demo for Fire Emblem Awakening. To me, it was something I never really experienced before. Up until that point, my games mainly consisted of Mario titles, Pokemon, and whatever third-party games I could get my hands on. Even though the demo itself contained the first 2 chapters minus the prologue, it was enough to quench my thirst and definitely pique my interest. I had no idea what Fire Emblem was at the time. Even when I got into a phase of playing Super Smash Bros. Brawl, I never really took notice of Marth and Ike. The only thing I took notice of was how much I liked the Castle Siege map. However, that super tiny step into Smash Bros. Led me to what you might expect. Smash 4. And while it was the 3DS copy where I found myself playing against CPUs, I remember playing that game almost every day I could. And what character did I main for the most part, you might wonder? Well, the only character I could recognize, of course, Robin. Looking back at Smash 4 as a whole, I don't really remember Robin being good in any capacity, and that probably extends to Smash Ultimate today. Either way, I still enjoyed tinkering with Robin and destroying CPUs with him. Might I also add that up until the release of Smash 4, I vividly remember the situation that took place when I first saw his introduction trailer. I might have not understood much, but what I recognized in that trailer would be my eventual mains for that game, Robin and Captain Falcon. And that's it for that time period. Outside of other events, such as being completely amazed by the first teaser trailer for Fates, and my attempts at looking at a bit of its gameplay before it released, I never really made any efforts to try to get the games. For the next few years, I started to get into Minecraft on my computer and didn't do much outside of that except for Pokemon. However, I was always a diehard Nintendo fan, even if I barely knew anything about other Nintendo properties. It was because of that where I finally became enticed by something that popped up one day on my YouTube list back in 2017. The Fire Emblem Direct. Off the bat, I'll admit I didn't really pay much attention to it. In all honesty, the Echoes bit kinda passed me by, which is quite ironic given where I've come since then. It's literally my favorite title in the series. However, what did catch my eye, which I reckon caught everybody else's eyes at the same time too, was the final announcement in that direct. Fire Emblem Heroes. Now, remember, outside of everything I previously mentioned, I never really had much experience with Fire Emblem as a whole, so when I saw that they were releasing an amalgamation of the core functions of the series, combined with various characters that span across the entire series on a mobile device, I was immediately hooked. Given that my experience with mobile devices, albeit an iPod 5 to start off with, had only occurred fairly recently in my life, I knew I wanted to give this game a chance to see what it was like. Even now, I'm at least proud to say I'm a day one player of Heroes, and still continue to play through the bumps and bruises throughout the years. Now, you're probably thinking, oh, it's a glorified Heroes baby story, and whatnot. I'll admit, there have been a few times where I've been a bit self-conscious about the fact that my first experience with the series in its entirety was the gacha mobile game that loosely takes from the main series itself. I mean, it's not like you're experiencing a fully fledged Fire Emblem game with all of its story, characters, and gameplay. I found that in a way it could be worse to admitting that you're, say, an Awakening baby, or started with FE7. And then when the community was split between post and pre-Awakening, I found out about those experiences and tensions. I'm just like, damn, it must be worse dealing with the fact that your first experience with the series wasn't even a main series title. Or at least, that's how my mind wanted it to be for a long time. However, what I eventually came to realize, and what I hope you can at least see too, is that it was the only real chance I had at experiencing an actual Fire Emblem property at the time. If it wasn't for the fact that it released for free on mobile devices, I might have not ever had the chance to jump into Fire Emblem in any capacity. And for that, I'm ultimately grateful that I had that chance, and subsequently took it to get to where I am now. Now, where was I? Oh yes, day one of Fire Emblem Heroes. While I did start playing day one, I didn't actually care too much for it at the time. I was playing on and off with no real commitment to the game or any idea as to what to do to keep up. Because of that, there's a bit of early game stuff that I don't have, such as copies of early Tempest Trial units. And boy, that's hitting me hard right now. In reality, I started a completely different gacha 2 months before Heroes came out, so my main focus was on that game, and not Heroes. And that gacha was Girls X Battle. While I did have fun with it for a time, I eventually dropped that game about a year later because I started to realize how terrible it was. It really only catered to people who were actively paying to stay ahead. No joke, there was a lot of stuff in that game that was stuck behind a paywall to even access. It wasn't fun. And looking back at how it was a game that I was initially baited into trying because of ads, it was probably a ripoff of a game in its entirety, which feels a bit weird, man. It was also around that time where I started having withdrawals from everything else I was playing, like Minecraft and Pokemon. Therefore, I went back to the one thing I really had on my phone that I was somewhat touching at the time and fully committed to it. Obviously, that game was Fire Emblem Heroes, and I've been playing it ever since. To answer specifically, I believe I started taking it seriously right after Book 2 came out, most likely after the banner with Soleil, Shiro, Sigbert, and Renat. Ever since then, I've been playing Heroes and experiencing every little bit that game has to offer. Eventually, of course, I'd find myself in plenty of rabbit holes because of Heroes. And while I cannot entirely remember which ones I found myself in first, I do remember going through and binging Phoenix Master 1's Echoes playthrough. For myself, I'm somebody who likes to experience watching a playthrough of something, and if I enjoyed that series a lot, I found myself very passionate for that game. That's exactly the situation that happened with me and Pokemon Heart Gold, for example. Hence why Echoes immediately stemmed out to me as a game that was driven by its cast and story, while having gameplay mechanics that enticed me greatly. Also, that it was new, might I add. However, it wasn't the first main series game I ended up trying and playing through in its entirety. That game honestly shouldn't have been FP7. However, I dropped it early on because I had realized that by chapter 18 of Elliewood's story, I completely missed chapter 16X. More specifically, that I missed out on Canas. Since I had played through the entirety of Lynn mode and then went on to Elliewood's story, I really didn't want to replay it all to get him. However, another game came into my radar thanks to videos that I found looking at games to start with, as well as instances through my early streams of Heroes in 2018. Might I add, that was some of the best fun I had at streaming in 2018, and that was about 2 years to this point, thinking about it now. I eventually found myself playing and streaming the first main series Fire Emblem title that I played during the summer of 2018, and that game was Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones. While I don't have any clips from when I was playing the game, I can say that I had a blast with it as my first Fire Emblem title I ever fully played through. If I remember correctly, I probably played on normal mode, but I went Ephraim's route because I wanted to challenge myself, at least in some regard. And while I did sleuth through some of it, I didn't have too many resets. I used units I wanted to try to use, and ultimately ended up satisfied with my play. I actually had a lot of fun with the new gaming experience, one that I had been long waiting for. Something I could sit back and say, I actually enjoyed that. It was a lot of fun, and I want more of that. But for a while, nothing happened. Eventually, I stopped streaming, started to stagnate and feel withdrawn. While I still had Heroes, I didn't have much else besides it, and that impacted me greatly. "2018 as a whole wasn't too good of a year for me. While everything started to slowly decline in 2017, I hit it rough in 2018, especially towards the end of the year. I made plenty of mistakes because I let my mind take over. I was severely depressed, and I wasn't getting any better. While I was trying to distract myself with other stuff like streaming, pursuing a relationship, and immersing myself in communities like Goose Gang, for example, Goosephone's community, it wasn't solving the innate problem. I was withdrawn from school, unhappy with my life and my mind, and was trying to look for fast remedies. I'd only like to believe it was probably during that time where I watched Phoenix Master 1's Echoes playthrough. I mentioned it briefly before, but in all honesty, I don't remember where it lies in my timeline. However, I could possibly see it being during this time. I found that the stories, the characters, and gameplay resonated with me deeply. I desired to play that game and experience it for myself one day. But even then, I knew that it was an experience that stuck with me deeply, even as a watched playthrough. Eventually, I did start to rebound by taking control of my life and seeking professional help, among other things, to repel my depression. I say that it was mainly during this time where I just stepped back from a lot of things and started to focus on myself and the one person who really mattered to me. And it was because of that one person and a bunch of convincing on my part for them to try a Fire Emblem game. They bought themselves a 2DS XL and a copy of Fire Emblem Echoes. And when they finally came to visit me during March 2019, they decided that it would be better that I finally experience a game that I had been wanting to play myself for a long time. For a while, I didn't have a 3DS system because mine mysteriously broke the year before, and so I never attempted to try to get my hands on it prior. However, once I did have the chance to play Echoes, it became an experience that I will honestly never forget. I'm going to start this section with a quote that most members of the Fire Emblem community should be familiar with. Just play Gaiden, bro! And while I didn't actually play Gaiden, having the chance to fully experience the modernized remake of the Dark Horse of the series was one that will deeply resonate with me for honestly the rest of my life. I love this game, even if it isn't a game that doesn't follow the main gameplay structure of most Fire Emblem titles to the pinpoint. Looking back on it now, even if there were things I didn't find ideal about the game, it was a game for the most part that I adored for its uniqueness, and how much I familiarized myself to not be completely surprised. I actually played Echoes on Hard Classic because I wanted to have, in my eyes, a raw, authentic challenge, and I pushed myself to limits I never really experienced before. Yeah, Miller's turn rail did mend a good amount of my mistakes, but I ultimately learned from those mistakes, and I made a lot of them. I wouldn't even say I'm ashamed of them either. We had to make those mistakes at some point in our time playing these games. While Echoes is a super forgiving game because of the turn wheel, it did its job in introducing my mistakes, how to adapt from those mistakes, and how to not make them again. In the end, it became a game that I'm always going to cherish for the experience I had with it. It was also because of Echoes that my perspective on Fire Emblem changed, and I became a lot more passionate for the series, specifically Echoes in general. My long-term plan in Heroes even reflects my admiration for the game too, while uncanny in itself. However, it's how I forged my enjoyment and entertainment with the series, and honestly, I couldn't be happier. How does that bring us to today? Well, during then and now, I played Three Houses along with everybody else, and have my own funny story of how I got my copy of the game, but that's for another day. But outside of Three Houses though, long story short, I have yet to really get over my current motivation, productivity, and commitment issues that remained from my depression. I've tried other Fire Emblem titles since Echoes, but never found myself continuing them just because I never cared to continue them. Titles like Path of Radiance, Shadow Dragon, Conquest, they all fall into that category. All games I want to play, yet find myself a little bit scared to play, or haven't found the situation to try to continue them. Even now, I've had a recent burst of fear for Genealogy and Thracia for honestly the stupidest reasons. Ultimately, I will play these games, one day. I can say that for sure. When that will happen though, I'm not quite sure. What I can say is what I've recently started. Remember how I said I was streaming for a while? Well, I'm trying again and again to get back into it, let alone making more content for this channel. I mean, look at my last two videos and the distance between them. Yeah, it's been a little bit tough. And thanks to a video from an elitist and an egg, I have found myself inspired to try streaming my experiences playing Fire Emblem games just across the board. But the question remains, what game am I playing? I've been enticed to play this game for a while, and I'm glad to say that my first impression stream went very well. So I'm proud to say that I'll be playing through Binding Blade, while streaming the entire thing on my Twitch. I've been fond of entertaining people live for a very long time, so being able to experience a series that I continue to grow more affectionate for, while streaming that experience and whatever else with others is something I'm very happy to do for fun. Therefore, I hope you guys find yourselves interested in watching me experience Binding Blade for the first time. I'll leave a link to my Twitch channel in the description if you're interested, so I hope to see you there. So that about wraps up my story. Where I started, what paths I took to get to where I am today, and where I plan to move going forward from it. I'm proud to say that I love this series, and I'm glad to see not only where I've come from, but where we've all come as a whole. Where the games have come since our first experiences with them, too. We wouldn't have these experiences with these games, or with friends and others, if it wasn't for the existence of these games as a whole. To me, much like how I've had a prosperous age and dark times, Fire Emblem has had them too, and I'm glad to be able to share such a parallel with the game series I love. So here's my question. What is your Fire Emblem story? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your experiences, long or short, lengthy or simple. We've had the chance to experience a series' 30 years worth of history, so let's share how we got here and start to experience the next 30 years of Fire Emblem. Anyways, feel free to like the video and subscribe, all that good stuff. And with that being said, thanks for watching. Bless Kaga for what he's done for us. Happy birthday, Fire Emblem.